Thanks so much for coming to tonight's program featuring two of our favorite MSNBC journalists. An embarrassment of riches tonight. I mean, it's raining and you came out, so that's really great. I'm Andrea Grossman, the founder of Writer's Block, now in our 29th season. Thank you. I thank you for fighting traffic when you could be at home, either watching what's happening in the world or sitting on your sofa watching every Netflix series there is, completely avoiding TV news. We all want to do that, including Chris Hayes, including Jacob Soboroff. But don't sit at home watching just Netflix. We need you to pay attention, and we need to pay attention. That's what tonight is all about. So turn your phones off, put them away, and tune in. Chris Hayes unwraps the day's news and gives us layers of analysis so we can make sense of it. He's one of the smartest guys in the field as he steers us through pretty toxic terrain. In his trailblazing new book, The Sirens Call, which just landed on the New York Times bestseller list thanks to us. I know there was help elsewhere, but he takes us through the attention disorder that all of us, every one of us, has. Let's be clear, it's not just about distraction from friends, colleagues, our jobs, and loved ones. Attention is an industry, and whoever controls that industry controls just about everything. Think about the onslaught of news we face every day these days. It's disabling, and it's exactly how Steve Bannon and his friends intend it to be. Chris writes that how we respond is pretty critical, so pay attention. Jacob Soboroff grabbed our attention when he wrote his great prize-winning book, Separated: An American Tragedy. It forced us to look at America's cruel policy of separating children from their parents at our southern border. It has recently become an absolutely terrific documentary directed by Errol Morris. But here in our own backyard, Jacob covered the Palisades fire with such personal investment and such grace that if he wasn't LA's favorite son before the fires, he is now. So here's what's going to happen tonight. Chris and Jacob will chat. Many of you have sent in some great questions, and Chris will address some of them. We've already given them to Jacob. Chris has signed a slew of copies of The Sirens Call, and he'll sign some more in the lobby. There will be no selfies or anything like that. We got to throw him in a car and get him to Rancho Mirage tonight. So he's going to quickly sign and hit the road. But just so you know, he's matching the ticket and book sales here tonight and donating that towards rebuilding parts lost in the wildfires. So I'm giving you some Jewish guilt because I know none of you have ever had that before. So if you weren't going to walk out with armloads of books before, you'll know that if you do tonight, it's going to a great cause. Sirens Call is a perfect gift for anyone who has ever broken eye contact with you to sneak a peek at their cell phone while you're wringing your hands about the gale force fire hose coming at us daily. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chris Hayes and Jacob Soboroff. These guys are really handsome.
Wow. Andrea's actually my mom. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Hayes. What's up, man?
How are you, buddy?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I think things are going great. I guess would be my main takeaway.
And that's it, guys. We're going to leave now. I just want to say a point of personal privilege before we do this whole thing. There is no NBC or MSNBC that I know without Chris Hayes. That's the truth. This is my This is I'm going my 10th year here, and I can't. There is no time that I've been here that you have not been here. And this book is about attention. You talk a lot about what it takes to get people to tune in and pay attention to your show, and you have been so gracious with me over the years, handing over your airtime, which is a very, very valuable commodity. And I can almost close my eyes and remember the first time I went on the show. But I can remember, so many stories.
The shooting, right? In
Yep.
in Oregon.
Up in Oregon, in Roseburg, Oregon, exactly. Umpqua Community College.
Yeah.
Then in San Bernardino, we had the shooting.
Yep. It's pretty sick that we could just like tick through the mass shootings that we've covered.
It's awful. Climate, but like this guy has given me, it's so unheard of in television to hand over 10, 11, 12 minutes to a reporter. Family separation, I really mean it. Like that moment where I walked out of that facility, the Walmart in South Texas, and you just let me talk. I had never experienced anything like it, and I remember thinking to myself, like, this is only possible on Chris Hayes' show because of who you are and how you cover these issues. Climate change in Guatemala, being in Ukraine, drinking toilet water.
I was just
in
about
Los
to
Angeles,
say.
drinking toilet water in Los. Guys, one day we're all going to be doing it. You better not. I'm serious. And of course, the fires. The first show I was on during the fires on that Tuesday night was yours. And you never flinch. You always hand over the airtime. It's never an interview. It's always a conversation. And I'm so very grateful. You are a mensch. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Thank
appreciate you.
I really appreciate that. You are a phenomenally gifted reporter, and being as handsome as you are really helps.
Chris Hayes is also my mom.
So when you got those two things together, you know.
For the people that were stuck in traffic on the way here tonight, anything happen on the show tonight?
I mean, it's hard. Well, we can do this for an hour. I mean, I think there's a lot happening. We're trying hard to maintain some discipline and focus. There's more happening than we can cover. It's always, I keep telling myself, like, there's a lot of other shows. I don't have to get to everything. I can focus on things. But I think generally, this isn't a funny thing happened in which I think everyone, both Democratic elected members of Congress, people in the media, had all these ideas where they were like, we're going to try to change some of the approaches to covering Trump this time. And one of the things I think people really, wanted to do was use modulation. And this was actually a really important thing in Trump 1.0 for me was, if you put the volume knob to 10 and you leave it there, it starts to sound like a 5. And then you can't turn it out past 10. So you got to leave some headroom. And I think there were moments like family separation was a moment where we turned it to 10, Jan 6 and COVID were moments where we turned it to 10, but we tried to keep it, So people were like, we're not going to freak out. We're going to modulate. And then it was just like, I think they took that as an invitation just like, okay, well, we're going to do everything all at once. And so now the challenge is like actually raising the alarm level to the appropriate level.
I want to talk to you a lot about the show. It's one of my favorite parts about the book, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, The Sirens Call, #1 New York Times bestseller. Mazel tov.
Thank you.
I'll get to the show and how you put the show together and how you think about the show sort of in the framework of the book. But to paraphrase Stephen Colbert, I really loved your interview with him. What is the Sirens Call?
I mean, the Sirens Call in the Odyssey, which is the opening image of the book, it's not actually that well described. Circe tells Odysseus as he's about to leave his island, where he's been like captured by and making love to her, to go home, that you're going to come to these sirens and they will warble you to death. And if you succumb to their entreaties, they'll pull the ship to the rocks and you'll die and never see your family again. And so she hatches this plan that she instructs him to stuff wax in the ears of his crew, to bind himself to the mast of the ship. And so when he hears the sound of the sirens, he will want to go follow them, but the crew will ignore him. And that, sure enough, happens. And to me, the reason this is one of the most potent images in the Western canon is because it sort of captures something about the self and our relationship to temptation, our relationship to the multiple selves we have, the self that binds yourself to the mass, knowing that the self to come might want to do something differently. I've known addicts in my life who have flushed their pills down the toilet and then immediately tried to go score more. The sort of battle between the id and the superego. And this fundamental story is him trying to manage his attention. And that feeling of being on the mast, I think, is the ubiquitous sensation of modern life. That the sirens compel attention against our will towards something destructive, and that all of life now is us on the mast with the sirens calling. I like that. That's a good reaction. We'll take that.
That was the noise I made when I was reading the book too.
Yeah. That's like that is to a book writer of nonfiction what like laughter is to a comedian.
It's true.
You know? It's like I got a full murmur there.
Was there a moment? I mean, so what compelled you to write this book? Was there a particular moment? Was it something that had happened in your life? Was it something you always wanted to do?
I've been thinking about this so much, and I write about this in the book, because my job fundamentally is a job about keeping people's attention. And particularly when I first got the show, I underestimated how much that was the case. I didn't quite realize that. I was like, well, I have a TV show people are going to watch. It's like, no, it doesn't really work that way. You have to get them to watch, and there's a bunch of things you have to do to work up and develop the craft and the ability to do that and build the relationship to make it happen. So it's been it's been something I'm thinking about every waking minute for the last 13 years. So that's part of it. There's a moment, I've been talking about this a little bit because it didn't make it into the book, but I wrote about it a little bit, was a moment of covering ISIS that I think was actually a really important moment in this, which is when ISIS kind of starts to roll through huge sections of Iraq and Syria. I don't know if you remember this, but they're putting out these propaganda videos. They're like doing like donuts on tanks, and also engaging in the most horrific and brutal atrocity and ultraviolence, which they are then like slickly packaging as propaganda. They're throwing gay men off towers, and then they're putting people in cages and lighting them on fire, and they're doing all this horrific stuff. And we're covering it, and we're not showing the worst of it, but there's some level at which I'm sort of like, this is news. Truly, what they're doing is important, but they're also doing something intentional to our attention, and I feel a little morally complicit in this. Because I'm showing it, and it's compelling, but it's also kind of their propaganda, and they want to grab our attention. And that moral complexity sort of stuck with me. And I think it's a little bit of that Sirens idea, is the germ of this idea that, like, what do you do with things that are compelling your attention, but you don't want them to, or they're for some negative ends? And then a lot of things come after that I think fit in that category.
You talk about this in the context of shootings, school shootings, the whole debate over whether or not to feature and talk about the perpetrators of these events.
Yeah, and I think mass shootings are the sort of worst domestic example of this, and we know actually that a lot of these are explicitly done for the attention that will come from it. It's the most kind of nihilistic end of this kind of obsessive scramble for attention, people committing mass murder for it. And then the question becomes, after they've committed this mass murder, are you giving it to them? And I think actually one of the things that I think is really good in our industry that is developed over the last decade is a much more sophisticated understanding of how to cover it in such a way that you're not conferring the attention primarily on the person who has committed this heinous act for that purpose. You're talking instead about the victims and the victims' families and what happened, and not sort of centering them. But those are sort of the darkest, most nihilistic versions, but they're the ones that sort of forced me to start thinking about our relationship to attention and the insight that ISIS had, which is the insight that attention is a kind of power, that like at some level they were as interested in the attentional power that they were aggregating as they were in the force of arms. They understood those two as together. And then, of course, you get Donald Trump, who clearly, obviously in a very different context and understands the power of attention. And I started thinking about that, and then I started thinking about my experience as a public figure. I wrote an essay for The New Yorker about fame, and that was really where it all sort of clicked into place.
Trump came up early in this conversation. He doesn't come up till page 214, really in depth in the book. Just
true.
So you know.
It's mostly, you can read, you can even drop out there if you want. You can.
We're sort of talking about this in the television world, but without modern technology, I feel like the essence of this book would not be there, and the conversations that you've been having and the things that we all think about around this wouldn't be sort of as acute as they are. And not only the name of the book, but you talk about a literal siren sort of early on in the book, and it made me think about being in Ukraine, actually, and doing some of the coverage that I did there, because one of the first things that I learned is that in Ukraine, there are these literal Cold War era sirens that sound when there were incoming missile attacks, ballistic missiles coming from Russia. And very early on during the war, this group of young people developed literally a siren in the palm of your hand, a smartphone app that had a siren that would go off, and 4 million people downloaded it within a week. Is that the literal manifestation sort of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, although what's interesting there is that that's being done for a socially useful purpose.
Yeah.
Which is a big distinction.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the reason the siren there and the sound of a siren is so central to what I'm saying here is because the core of the analysis in the book, and I think the kind of bedrock of the problem, is the faculty that we have for attention, which is kind of divided into a few categories. And one of those, and in some ways the primary one to the evolutionary advantage that attention confers, is the involuntary attention of our attention being wrenched by some stimulus. That's what a siren is designed to do. You are in danger, and you hear the sound, and then you have to do something. And that's the sound of the predator in the bushes. But because of that faculty is preconscious and involuntary, which means if someone bursted through those doors screaming right now, your head would whip around before you got to weigh in consciously on whether you wanted to or not. You don't get a choice, right? And in fact, that involuntary nature of it is necessary for it to detail its function. If you're walking out in the middle of the street, looking at your phone, and a car's about to hit you and honks, right? The honk is going to save your life because before you can consciously know whether you want to pay attention to the horn or not, you do. But it's also that facility that is being abused and exploited for the purpose of compelling our attention independent of our will. And the best example of that, to go back to the smartphone, and I'm sure this was wired into the Siren app, is the haptic feedback in the phone.
Yep.
The buzz. The physical buzz sensation engineered into your phone you notice that whether you want to or not, right? That's a preconscious manipulation. So yes, that app is a perfect example, but in that rare case, they're actually using it for the elementary purpose. Yeah.
Do I have this right? So you believe attention, you postulate, attention is our era's most valuable resource, like the natural resources of the Industrial Revolution, and like during the Industrial Revolution, like labor as well. These things were extracted from the workers. Now attention is being extracted from all of us. Do I have it right?
Yeah, basically. I mean, I think that attention is, I don't know if in the aggregate it's the most valuable. I would say it's the defining resource. And I think there's a real similarity to, one way to think about it is in terms of like oil, and D. Graham Burnett, who's this great writer and thinker on attention, talks about the fracking of our minds. The idea that the thing you're trying to get is in here, and they're using ever more complicated and sophisticated means to extract it. The way that I think it relates to labor, and this is a little complex, but I'll try to do this in TV time. So here's one of the conundrums about the value of labor in the Industrial Revolution. And this is actually the kind of jumping off point for Marx's labor theory of value, which I write in the book. So the aggregate value of all human labor in the Industrial Revolution is enormously valuable, and in fact, the necessary precondition for industrial production. If you don't get everyone going into the factories and converting all these people into workers, you don't get industrial production, you don't get the Industrial Revolution. So all of the aggregated value of labor is really, really valuable, right? The individual's attention on the, labor on the market is a pittance. Like, you're selling your entire life for nothing, but the value of it as a whole is a lot. And then its value to you is everything. You get one life. You're going to spend 60 hours in a sweatshop stamping soles of shoes, and that's it, for nothing. There's something similar happening with attention. The aggregate value of billions of people's attention creates the world's most valuable and powerful companies. Google and Meta and Apple, right? The actual market value of the little slivers of your attention that are being auctioned off when an Instagram Reels is loading and there's an algorithmic auction happening in the background is literally fractions of a penny. So it's nothing in the market. But the value to you of your attention is all you have. It's the substance of life. When your life is finished, your life will be what you paid attention to in every instant. So when it's taken from you, it matters to you. And we've ended up in a very similar kind of triangular paradox of these values that I think does map very cleanly onto the way labor functioned.
I smile because listening to you talk about this, I do not know a more prolific user of social media than Chris Hayes, I would think.
Well, it's research, Jacob.
You hit that stuff hard. How do we square that circle? How do we?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, the line I use is that I sometimes feel like I'm a tobacco executive with a 2-pack-a-day habit, and I'm like, well, I gotta sample the product. I mean, I gotta see how our product is. Yeah, I mean, I do think that my relationship to social media is part of the gestation of this book, and I do sometimes feel a little like I've written a recovery memoir while I'm still drinking. Which people do, by
That's
the
what
way.
I'm saying. I'm looking at Chris on social. I'm like, have you read your own book?
Yeah, I mean, I am not holding myself as a guru in any of this. But I actually do think my relationship to it has been, like, the relationship to social media and also being on TV, all of these things I think are part of what gestated the book.
Yeah.
And
What makes you an expert?
yeah, and I think that I think that I've created ways of navigating it that are much healthier than the sort of earliest impulses. But I can also really see in certain public figures who have kind of like truly kind of broken their minds through the allure of the siren.
What do you mean?
There's this guy Elon Musk, and
Never heard of him.
and I think it's just very clear, and I think the reporting supports this, that like the particular dynamics of social attention at scale that social media produces have driven him mad. He has pickled his brain in the brine of Twitter, and he has fallen prey to this kind of obsessive sort of relationship to it. And I think it's really driven him crazy, but I also understand a little bit of that.
I mean, I was going to say, I mean it seriously. Did you ever have that moment where you said, "Whoa"?
Yes. I mean, early on in the show, when the show's ratings were not great, I was like feeling extremely like I was kind of fight or flight all the time. My wife referred to me as looking like a hunted animal. And I was just in fight or flight mode basically every waking second. I felt really...
Did you look during the show? Were you Are you
I would look at
that would look during the show?
I would
the
look at
feedback?
mentions.
In real time.
And it was all a lot of it was negative. I mean, it was a lot of like, "You're not my real dad" kind of thing. Because I'd, replaced someone else, and the audience was like, who's this kid? I don't want to... And there was a kind of compulsive nature to it. I felt at a certain point like I was like, I needed one of those cones for dogs, for social media of like, stop trying to like get at it. You're going to make the wound worse. And I had a dinner with one of my best friends who I was sort of saying all this. He's like, just please do me a favor. Promise me you just spend a week and you don't look at your mentions. Like, just don't look. And I was like, yeah. And then I stopped, and I basically, that really, like, I quote a line of Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher, writing this back 2,000 years ago, like, basically saying, like, why do you care so much what people think of you? What does that do? What does that mean to you? What does that do to you? But part of what I was experiencing there is, we all understand that fame drives people mad, and in fact, that's like a trope. In fact, people have seen the new Dylan biopic. It does a really good job of showing this. There's a really amazing moment where he like goes to a bar to watch a show, and then like someone's like, Bob Dylan, he's mobbed, and and what social media does is it democratizes the madness of fame to anyone with a phone. Like, we are not designed to take social attention from strangers at scale, because all social attention we receive in the formative parts of our life are in the context of mutual relationships and covalent bonds that are the stuff of friendship and love and kinship and collegiality and all of the relationships we have that are bilateral with other human beings. Social attention from people you don't know gets into your brain, and it triggers all that wiring as if you're hearing from a person that you love, but they're not. And so that's why people go nuts with fame. But what social media allows is to have everyone have that experience.
I get, when I read the book, I really did get the sense that if you didn't have to talk about Donald Trump, you probably wouldn't have in this book. But in the way that I said on page 214, you really get to him and you say, it's sadly at this point in the book, I'm forced to talk at some length about Donald Trump. In a way, if the phone and social media are the technological manifestations of this Sirens Call, is Trump the human manifestation of the Sirens Call?
Yeah, and there's a crazy kind of echo, mirror reflection between the Sirens Call of the phone and the Sirens Call of Trump. And in fact, it was sort of made almost perfectly literal on that inauguration stage, where it's he's up there.
All the dudes.
And that it's all the people that run the companies that engineer the attention extraction at scale, like in the front row next to him.
What did you think when you saw them, other than my book is going to sell 1 billion copies?
Honestly, the developments of the last few months, because the book, I finished the book, and you know how book lead times work, have been freakish in how the degree to which this sort of central issue is sort of manifesting. Trump is good at compelling attention, and also understands in a kind of feral, primal, pathological way that attention is the most important resource.
But it doesn't have to be positive attention.
That's the key. That is his one simple trick for hacking public discourse is, unlike other politicians, most other politicians, he understands that negative attention is still attention. And in the attention age, when attention is the most valuable resource, getting negative attention works just as well. And that's not something that most people aren't like that. If Andrea had been like, I got a room full of 400 people that hate your guts, but they'll pay attention, I'll be like, maybe I'll pass. Most people don't want to get a lot of negative attention. There has to be some part of you that's a little broken, I think. And I think he's the thing about Donald Trump is, and this is actually one of his superpowers, is people sometimes say that he's authentic or tells it like it is. And what they are identifying is something true, which is that he is authentically broken. And I really that's partly a punchline, but I really mean it. That the compulsive feral need that he has, he is not faking. That he is being true to himself when he pursues it. And it's partly because of that it's so effective.
Have you ever met him?
No.
Do you ever think...
I would like to spend a lot of time with him.
He'd like an autographed copy. I've often thought about, as a reporter, what... I had one interaction with him, maybe you guys remember, but it was in 2016. You might have even been at the desk with Rachel, but it was an election night. It was the Nevada caucus, and he walked in unannounced, to the room.
Yes, I do remember that.
I didn't know what the fuck to say. I was so caught off guard.
Right.
And I didn't expect him to come. I was fumbling and bumbling, and he looked at me, and First, he put his hand on the camera lens and pushed it back because he knows exactly how far he wants to be away from the camera. And I said, Mr. Trump, we're live on MSNBC. Blah, blah, blah. And right away, he says, oh, no, I said, I'm on with Rachel Maddow. And he goes, tell Rachel Maddow I love her charts. And the way she puts my little head on top of that bar graph, it's just the best. And every day since then, I'm like, what would I say to Donald Trump if I became face-to-face with him again? And obviously, with the reporting and all this stuff, I got a whole list of things. Do you have if it ever happened, do you know what the first thing you would ask him about or say to him? Well, what?
What's the difference between Medicare and Medicaid?
Neither may exist soon, so I don't
Yeah,
know.
right.
Another thing I really loved about this book is you're so honest about yourself. Is a little bit of therapy, I feel like, for you in writing the book. I want to read something. Though I never aspired to be a TV news anchor, I came to recognize that something deep inside me had brought me to this line of work. In my current predicament, whence the urge I cannot say, I had a very happy childhood, mundane levels of anxiety and neuroses. I was a much more neurotic child. But I have as a core constitutive. Thank you very much. It's Chris Hayes, fucking smartest guy I know. Feature of my personality, the desire for an audience. I want people to pay attention to me, and more than that, I want them to like me. We're all the same in TV, a little bit. Are people like us in some measure, who like the attention, who want the attention, who seek the attention? I mean, we can blame the phone and the technology and the siren. But how you talk about social attention, like our desire to want this connection. How much are we to blame for this era?
I think we're partly to blame, but I think the big shift is there's always been people. I think people have different relationships to social attention, and there have always been people who, are gregarious and outgoing, and there are people who are shy, and there are people who like to be in public doing this kind of thing, and there are people who are like, you could not pay me enough money, like, to go out. It's like they feel about it the way I feel about, like, when I read about people who do, like, ultra marathons, It's like, what is wrong with you?
But the best part of running the New York Marathon is when I saw Chris and Kate on the side of the...
Yeah, we cheered them on.
You know how you know that somebody ran the marathon? They'll tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
It's so true. So, there's...
I like attention.
Yeah. And there'll always be people... So I think that, people have different relationships to it. There's a certain fundamental need we all have for social attention, as I discuss in the book. I don't know how much we're responsible, but what I do think has shifted is this desire for attention from others used to be seen as, like, kind of gross and unsavory. I mean, I think about my grandfather all the time, who's no longer alive and who I really, truly loved, and got to spend a lot of time with sort of towards the end of his life particularly. And he was a conservative, very right-wing Republican, Catholic, anti-communist, anti-abortion guy. We did not share politics, but he was a really decent guy. He was his own man, but he hated show-offs. Hated show-offs. And I was starting to do some TV at the end part of his life, and he and my grandmother are very proud of that. They didn't, like, hold that. But I always wonder about, like, how he was very much this, like, classic Greatest Generation, stoic Irish Catholic man. Like, you don't show emotion, but also, which, like, there's a lot of repressed bad stuff about that. But, like, the degree that he would have despised how Trump comports himself in public. I always wonder, like, which would have won out. His politics and his sort of political affiliations, or that disposition in him. But what I do think has changed, and again, I don't know if we're the people who changed it, but it genuinely, I think, is true, and I think it's borne out in polling about younger people, that the desire for social recognition, or social attention, I should say, and celebrity has become a kind of guiding, status-seeking thing at the top of the shared pyramid in a way that it just never was before. And how should I feel about that? Because it's
Yeah.
weird, right?
I was
Because
gonna say there used to be a producer that I worked with. I mean, one of my dearest colleagues, Mitch Koss, who was with me for many years at MSNBC, and would talk about how people turning to that instinct or desire is you talk about like failed states sort of towards the end of the book. It's a sign of a sort of a collapsing civilization, that's where people turn for sort of recognition, financial gain. What's happening to us that this is our, so many of us want this?
I think there's larger structural factors at play that have made attention so valuable, which I discuss at some length in the book. I think that there's a lot of things in this book that have these sort of two features, which is like, one is the human condition, and you can read people thinking about this stuff and talking about it going far back, and one is the particular set of market structures, institutions, and technologies we have now, and they're sort of working off each other. I mean, so I think that, one of the things I think is true is that people view, and this is a point that Tressie McMillan Cottom, I think, wrote about, who's a columnist for New York Times and brilliant woman, that people view sort of influencer fame or social media as like kind of the last vestige of some kind of meritocracy. Like some form of social mobility, some kind of form of rags to riches, some sort of form of like coming up in the world from nowhere, and that it's this last kind of engine of that, which I thought was a pretty profound idea. I think you saw this a little bit with the kind of like rise and fall of Hawk-Tuah girl, who was a young woman in Tennessee, I believe, who was like a teacher, I want to say. She's very young. She was in this, she was in a viral clip that went mega viral, describing fellatio, and had this sort of moment of fame where she had a podcast. And then, like, the ultimate culmination of this and the ultimate distillation of the attention age and the monetization of attention is launching a meme coin, right? Launching a cryptocurrency that monetizes in the purest possible way your attention. And she did that, and then it kind of collapsed, and people were mad at her. But this trajectory was just a perfect parable of a certain kind of sort of rags to riches, out of nowhere story of the attention age.
Hayes coin will be available in the lobby after the.
It's a really good coin. I talked. Can I just quickly do a riff on this?
Yeah.
I did a podcast with a guy about the Trump meme coin. Because he launched his meme coin. I was like, I don't quite understand this, and he was talking about meme coins, and my jaw is just on the floor the whole time. I was like, I truly can't unbelieve that what you're telling me is true, and that there is so much money flowing in and out of this.
Billions.
And at one point, he sort of casually is like, and he's like, there's some meme coins, they sort of ascend to become blue chip meme coins, like Dogecoin and Fartcoin, and it's like, oh, man, it made me feel like 95 years old and like Grandpa Simpson. I was like, I don't like this.
Did you buy any? No.
I'm real long Fartcoin.
Yeah. Can you guess my favorite story in the book? I'll just tell you if you want.
Yeah, what?
You download TikTok in part as, quote, research for the book.
Oh, yeah.
What did TikTok find out about you?
Oh, yeah. So this is sort of early in the book writing, and I found TikTok. I mean, TikTok really is kind of the cutting edge. It's important when we talk about AI.
I love this. This is a great story.
AI and large language models, that machine learning at scale, the first place it really gets deployed are the algorithms of social media. It's doing the kind of machine learning. So I download it, and I'm up in a little I have a few days writing in this house we have in the country, and I take a gummy, and I'm chilling, and I'm sitting there at the TikTok, and at a certain point it occurs to me that for the last 45 minutes, I'd been watching videos just of people making sandwiches. And then cutting them in half and then doing the thing where they fan it out for you to see. And there's this amazing, there's this Arthur C. Clarke line about any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I just had this moment of the algorithm knows I'm stoned. It 100% figured out that I was high. And I was like, that really blew my mind.
Am I right? Am I right that in another one of your books, there's a weed Easter eggs in all of your books? Like, did you tell a story about getting stopped at the airport?
No, I got stopped at the RNC.
At the RNC.
In 2000 with a little bit of weed. I'm not a big weed person, just for the record. I really am not.
Was that in one of your books or you saw it on TV one
No,
time?
it was in one of my books.
Yeah, I knew it. Yeah. Oh, man, I can't wait for the weed story in the next book. So my favorite way that you talk about the attention economy in the book is when you talk about the show, because it's so relatable to me. We all get these quarter hour, and you talk about in the book, these quarter hour rating emails every single day. And it's a literal measure of how closely people are paying attention to the show. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it affects you, how you use them or don't use them in order to sort of structure the show every night, build a rundown, as we say?
Yeah, so we call them in-house. We always call them the numbers. We never call them ratings. We say the numbers. Like, the numbers were good last night. The numbers were bad. How are the numbers for the A block? It's a color-coded spreadsheet in 15-minute increments. It's distributed differently now, but it's all of our programming in 15-minute increments, and then Fox and CNN, and sometimes other networks, CNBC. So you can see, and you can sort of pour over and see, like, when did it go down and when did it go up, and how did you do in the hour before you? And this is public, so it's like coming to school every day, and like everyone's grades are on the bulletin board. And if you're like me, and kind of go-getter A student, and you're getting bad grades, it's pretty tough. It really fucked me up in the first part of the show. Like, it was I think that's definitely the worst I've ever felt about myself. I mean, luckily it only lasted a few years, but I'm fine now. And but one of the it's hard because it's not great data, and it's kind of garbage in, garbage out, but you can definitely see signals, and like over time, I was not rating that well. I was sort of the show before me would rate higher, the show after me would rate higher.
You were the hammock, as we say in the business.
That's what we call it. The hammock is just like, yeah, that was me, just sitting right there. It's cool. It's just millions of people rejecting you. It's not like a big deal.
He's okay, I swear to God.
And there's a few things I've thought of. I mean, with specific reference to the ratings, I don't think looking at the ratings helps. And what ended up happening was, I was like, this is a math problem I can figure out, and I tried to reverse engineer something from the data, and none of it worked. And then I just kind of found my footing. I got better at what I was doing. Frankly, people just got used to me. Like, honestly, just, like status quo bias.
So you didn't, or you don't today, sort of tailor. I mean, the thing I like in the show is you talk about, the cold open of the show, and you say you have this.
Tonight on All In.
I was going to ask him to do it. Do it again.
Tonight on All In.
We all know it.
My kids love when I do that for them. I do that for them.
Like, Chris, you're screaming. He's like, that's how people are going to tune into the show. What are the little tricks that you use and think about? Go ahead.
Well, let me say this. The biggest thing is I got better at understanding the attentional atmosphere, which I analogize to like wind to a sailboat.
Yep.
Like, you can't pretend it's not there. There's this actual thing happening, which is the flow of people's attention.
I heard you talking about this with Steve Inskeep on NPR. It was
yeah,
great.
And you have to use it to get to where you want to go.
Yeah.
And I've gotten better at that. I've gotten better at the craft of sort of sailing, meaning the attentional flows are this way. This is where I want to take things. I got better as a performer. A huge thing about television that I didn't quite understand is that the hardest thing to be on television is yourself. And yourself not in any fight or flight elevation. Like, and I have an Apple Watch now, like 13 years into this, my heart rate is exactly the same on the TV show as it is talking to my wife at the kitchen table. But that's purely reps. That's like, that was not the case early on. And when you think about like the truly great television people, Carson, Letterman, Oprah, like just think about the level of calm they have. Like how, like I was like really excitable. I'm an excitable person. I talk with my hands, but that has just come down over reps. My comfort, like my embodiedness in my being. And then there's the craft of storytelling. I've always had a pretty good gift for talking, which is a weird thing to do for a living, but it's what I do for a living. And I just got better at the craft. The last thing I'll say about the numbers is that I had a moment in 2020 during COVID. We were maybe 4 weeks into lockdown or 5 weeks. I was doing the show in a home studio. And you could sort of see that people were just starting to kind of lose attention in COVID. There's in the beginning, there's this big surge of interest because like, what's going on? Then, people got a little tired of the story, and you could start to see the numbers soften. And I started feeling this like tug of like, well, should we stay on the pandemic that's killing a few thousand people every day? And I just had this moment of like, you get one shot. Like, we have a public duty here. You get one shot. I'm just going to stop looking at the numbers. And I've never looked since.
Never.
That's
impressive.
Never. I have no idea. I have no idea. I don't look. I don't know. I trust myself to know, like, I can feel. I just saw this today because someone that works at MSNBC sent me this. In the last 2 weeks, I could feel the attention back. I can feel it.
I'm not even joking. Through engagement on social media?
I just know. No. I just know it. I feel, because I know that what's happening is people care about and are up off the mat. And I didn't need to look at a spreadsheet to know that. I just know it, like in a deep part of me experientially. And this is also borne out in the data. But that's what I mean. Like, you develop, it's like a surfer finding the swell of the wave. Like, it's now tactile.
So that is sort of how you process people's attention and how they tune in and why they tune in and when they tune in. I'm curious about your attention in terms of the story selection on the show. And actually, I thought, man, one of the most fascinating exchanges I've actually seen in a long time on TV was you had the handover with Rachel the other night, on the night that Trump said all the stuff about Gaza. And she said to you in the handoff, sometimes it's quick, sometimes you guys have these extended conversations. She said to you something to the effect of, in the spirit of watch what he does, not what he says, how are you thinking about this news that he said we're going to go in there and we're going to occupy it and it's going to be the Riviera and all this stuff that basically walked back the next day, or the White House walked back the next day. And interestingly, I mean, you didn't really have a choice because it broke during your hour. Am I right about that? Right before?
He was on right before.
Right before. You kind of had a conversation about how the sausage was made with Rachel in real time on the show. Can you remind everybody what you said about sort of how you decided in that moment to cover that particular story?
Well, we were having this sort of frenetic conversation because we had, when one of my senior producers, Tina Cohn, is here, who's
the best,
phenomenal and incredible, and
give it up for Tina Cohn.
We have an amazing team at All In, and Tina chief among them. And it's a lot of very smart people thinking in very rigorous ways who are very technically skilled. And so we have this thing, it's happening on our air. And then I'm being like, oh, I must have misheard that. Did he say we're going to own it? Hey, did you guys, he didn't say own. Did he say own? He said own. Wait, he said maybe U.S. troops? So we're sitting there, I'm like, well, this is, I can't believe this. Now, the reason that I thought that it was more than him riffing was that he had just come from a meeting with Netanyahu, and Netanyahu was on stage smiling. And the other calculation I made in my head is, if it's a trial balloon, it's pretty important to shoot down. Like, if the idea of a trial balloon is to be like, well, let's see how this goes over, it's pretty important to be like, not well. It's not a good, no. So, and then the last thing I thought about it, and this is the thing that kind of haunted me about it, and I think it's still true. There's this notion in philosophy of language of a speech act. A speech act is a form of speech that actually effectuates something in the world. The classic case being, I hereby pronounce you man and wife. The hereby, which is a sort of English indicator of the Speech Act, and there's a famous philosopher named J.L. Austin who writes about Speech Acts a lot. In this case, there was a kind of Speech Act happening. And what I mean by that is, whether this happens or not, and I don't think it will, every ISIS recruiter and in the world is hearing this and being like, they are exactly the imperialist marauders that we've been saying they are. And that, you can't take that back. So for all of those reasons, again, this is a very quick conversation we're having, it felt like we should lead with it. And we were lucky to get Van Hollen, who was very good on it, and then we had Jeremy Konondijk, who is at Refugees International and worked at USAID formerly. And I feel good about, even though it has sort of subsequently been walked back, I actually do think...
That was one of your best shows in a long time.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that.
It was amazing to see, because I could see you, we're sort of wrestling with all the issues in this book without explicitly saying it in real time.
Yeah, and we were trying to... Again, I was trying to be clear-eyed and rigorous and sort of nail to the ground what we had heard and what this meant, in real time. Because again, it ended 10 minutes before us.
That's right. Yeah, it was terrific. I have so many questions that have been submitted through the audience, but I just a couple more from me before we get to those. At the end of the book, do I have this word right? You talk about the enshittification of society.
Yeah, particularly of tech platforms.
Platforms. Can you define enshittification? And what does it mean? What is it?
Pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. All right. What does it require of us?
Cory Doctorow, who's a great writer and tech thinker. Nice. Yeah, some Cory Doctorow applause. I love it. Founder of boingboing.net for a certain cohort of internet nerds.
Boing Boing. You're another great Chris Hayes. Your description of using the early internet in the book is so good.
Well, the early internet felt like the feeling of the early internet was like you just got off a plane in like Paris and you're like, where should we go? What's out there?
CompuServe.
And now it's like the feeling of like you're car sick and in traffic.
So true. What does the enshittification of technology require?
Cory Doctorow has coined this term. It's basically about the kind of way that tech platforms and online spaces that start out being awesome become shitty. And it's about kind of the short version of the theory is that the growth imperatives lead them to cannibalizing their own users. That at a certain point you reach a point where you need growth so much that you have to sort of start abusing your own users to achieve that growth. And the experience gets worse and worse. I mean, Google right now is an amazing example. Google was genuinely one of those rare kind of like building a better mousetrap innovations that everyone was trying to do search. They figured out a way to do it better. It was so much better. It completely reordered the internet. It was part of what led to the growth of the open web was Google. And they had a monetization model where they sell AdWords next to your searches. And what's happened is over time, as they have tried to grow and get more revenue, is that the advertising has cannibalized the rest of the product. Now they're using Gemini AI at the top so that you never leave the page. And the product's gotten worse. Like
you tell this story about looking for a particular kind of car with a particular amount of seats and rows.
Yeah, I asked for like a 3-row electric vehicle, and here's 5 sponsored links, none of which are 3-row electric vehicles. It's like, this literally doesn't work. And so this process, I think, again, part of the reason that I'm very hopeful about what comes after this is that the process has led us to things that daily active users for almost all the platforms are in decline. People genuinely do not enjoy the product. Like, they may be addicted to it, they don't enjoy it. Mm-hmm. There's this index that people will check for like regretted minutes, which has been going up.
Really?
Yeah, Musk actually posted about this the other day, about how he's going to like try to get their regretted minutes down. Which is such a funny thing to say about your products. And so I think I think that this is all pushing people to a point where people want something else, something different.
If my therapist was here, and he very well might be.
What's up, Jacob therapist? You're doing good work, buddy. He seems very intact to me.
Hi, Larry. I feel like mindfulness would be a word that came to mind.
Yeah.
But you kind of deal with mindfulness relatively quickly in the book as a potential sort of solution to all of this.
Well, I think the reason for that is, first of all, Jenny Odell's great book, How to Do Nothing, which I really recommend to people, talks at that length. Yeah, it's a great book. Johan Hari and Stolen Focus talks about it a bit. And also, like, it's like, the mindfulness tradition is one of the most, like, profound spiritual and philosophical contributions to human life of all time. And it just felt weird to, like, dip into it. And so there's lots of places you can do really good reading on this.
Well, but it sort of made me, it made me wonder if you think it's sort of a way out of all of this, or you talk about sort of other solutions about putting age limits and time limits and all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is, and I think there's a reason that people, I mean, my favorite is like the proliferation of mindfulness apps, which is so perfect.
Exactly.
Be like a haptic notification being like, go be mindful now. No, but I think that I do. I just think that I don't have any first-person experience with it, and I know a lot of people who do. So I was trying to be sort of authentic to that. I also just think that, like, things we can do, it's a bigger problem than individual action. So, like, yes, there's certain things you should do, which is, like, not have your phone at the table and put it in a place in your house that's a little less accessible. And I think everyone should try to spend 20 minutes every day alone with their thoughts. It's something I've been...
You talk about you've always taken long walks.
Yeah, and I think the daily constitutional is great, and sort of reacclimating yourself to being alone with your own thoughts. But I think there's a bunch of things that happen to have on a social level.
Is there, what about like a regulatory sort of some kind of framework? You talk about, hourly protections of workers or child labor laws, things like that.
You're already seeing regulation of age limits in states across the country. You're seeing it in some school ordinances being passed.
You think those things will work?
Yeah, I think we need to regulate attention. I do. There's no reason we can't, other than we're Americans and we're like, no, screw that. America's really bad. Like, there's this classic work of sociology called Baptists and Bootleggers, which sort of captures this idea of, like, we really like to do things either like total prohibition, puritanical, or like all bets are off. Like, it's like 1 week it's like gambling is illegal, and the next week, like, in the maternity ward, it's like, we have a parlay for your newborn. It's like, there's got to be something in between this.
We didn't even get to talk about the slot machines. So I'm gonna go to some audience questions because you guys submitted a lot of them. I don't have names, but I'm just gonna go for it.
Yeah,
here.
just anonymize.
In the era of Trump 2.0, how can Democrats wrestle attention away from Republicans who are so willing to lie, troll, and conspiracize for it? How can we overwhelm these forces and push truth to the forefront of public discourse?
I wish I had it's a good
I
question.
should have asked that question instead. It was mine.
Well,
Good question.
I mean, one thing, I don't have an answer, but I do have, like, some process thoughts, which is you have to not be scared of attention, actually want it. Like, you have to just go do stuff. And you should talk to everyone. Talk to podcasts. Go on local news shows. Go on national news shows. Like, try to, if there's a microphone, go talk into it. And if you can put stuff on social media, you should do that. Like, you got to try different things, and you have to be willing, and you have to understand that will come with some downside risk, that, like, you might say something and it becomes a little controversy. Like, it'll go away. Don't worry. Keep going. If J.D. Vance stopped, he would not be vice president. After, if he had a lot of bad interviews. So I do think that, like, the first level is reorienting yourself towards understanding this is a crucial part of your job. And there's, I think one of the things I think is interesting about the way the parties select is that I know a lot of Democratic politicians. I talk to them a lot. A lot of them really they like the power that comes with the job. They like the status. They have big egos. That's all 100% true. But also genuinely want to get stuff done, are doing it because they like to govern. And when you're in opposition, you don't get to govern. All you get to do is try to work on attention and public opinion. And I think Democrats are poorly suited to that, whereas Republicans like opposition so much that they're in opposition to their own government. Really, they're that's part of the story here. They are so wired for opposition and the attentional conflict of opposition that they're declaring war against the government they run because they have to stay in opposition to it.
Okay, here's another one. Considering what many consider a coup by Elon Musk earlier this week, how do we maintain a focus of attention on this crime in the... By the way, I'm an NBC News journalist with standards and legal, and I can't believe that I'm allowed to ask these questions.
These are not your words.
No. I'm asking on your behalf, just making it clear for my bosses. How do we maintain a focus of attention on this crime in the context of Trump's daily outrageous pronouncements, such as as we talked about, what he said about Gaza? Is there a way to develop a critical mass of attention and resistance to more vital events, especially when the actions of the administration threaten those on both sides of party lines?
Yeah, I think the what the questioner referred to as the Elon coup, is a place where right now there is the happy alignment of the sort of attentional wins and the substance of the story. He is a kind of larger-than-life figure, even though he's a vortex of negative charisma. Just the most unbearable dork that's ever lived. But there is attentional energy on him, and it's also a really important story. So right now, it's in that sort of good place in the Venn diagram, and we've been leading with it and talking about it. And people, I also think it's penetrating out concentric circles a little bit to people that don't follow political news. I don't know if people saw that the 25-year-old who'd been granted access to the Treasury payment system had to resign today because they found his Twitter profile. And it's exactly what you would imagine it was, including such bangers as "I was racist before it became cool" and "normalize Indian hate." Cool guy.
Here's another one. What do you think is the most effective way for citizens who are Democrats to grab the attention of the media in resisting the Trump coup? We don't want to whistle in the wind and amass a lot of people without seizing the maximum force of the media.
Look, the protests the other day worked. There were people in the streets. They were big enough numbers to get cameras. There was local coverage. There was national coverage. It's a start. The people going out in USAID in New York, where I'm from, NYU Langone Hospital canceled health care for 2 trans kids. They said, pursuant to the Trump executive order, it's really not clear that that's actually true, but hospitals are risk averse. There was hundreds of people outside NYU Langone chanting, "Protect trans kids." There was a protest along the similar lines in Los Angeles today, I want to say. Today, right?
A big immigration protest 2 or 3 times over the last
So,
couple days.
yeah, again, you got to try different things, but, getting into the streets and amassing groups of people is one thing that it's tried and true, and it's hard to do, but it does something.
I say this all the time about family separation. It is the one significant, massive policy reversal of the first Trump term. And when he signed that executive order,
Dude, that footage you're in documentary is amazing.
Undoing the policy that he himself put into place, and there was hundreds of thousands of people in this, maybe millions all over the world. The Pope spoke out against this. But what he said was not, "I'm morally appalled and opposed to what my Department of Homeland Security is doing." He said, "I didn't like the sight and the feeling of children being separated," which I think was in reference to that ProPublica audio, but I think just as much to the people in the streets all over the world.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important things for people to hold dear is that public opinion didn't disappear because they won an election by 1.5 percentage points.
You said this on the day after the election, I remember.
Yeah, it's not. It's still like we still do have a democracy. Public opinion still does matter. Like,
Civil society
Civil
matters.
society is still here, and if you're skeptical about maybe I'm wrong, but then we're screwed anyway. So, what is there to do? It's a little it's like Pascal's wager. You believe in God because if you're wrong, it's going to be tough when you meet him. It's the same way. It's let's just act as if all this matters, because if it doesn't, then we're dead anyway. So why don't we give ourselves a chance? Yeah, applaud that. Yeah, thank you.
Just a couple more. How do you think the news media can cover the fact that Democratic leadership has seemingly made no plans to resist the overthrow of the Constitution when this is the single most important story of our time? Maybe you don't agree.
Well, I think they were caught pretty flat-footed. Part of what I think it was, there's a bunch of reasons they were caught flat-footed, I think. One of them was when Democrats lose an election, their first instinct, and it's not a bad instinct because it's part of the recalibration that keeps the sort of engine of accountability of democracy going, is to be like, well, what do we get wrong and why do we lose the election? And it's actually that's kind of what you want in a democracy. That's sort of the point. If you lose the election, for the losing party to be like, well, we did something wrong. And because I think they were in that mind space, and because I think people had a little bit run together the first Trump term with the Biden administration, that the resistance failed, but it didn't really. The mobilization against Trump during the Trump years was pretty successful. He was a one-term president. He had more votes against him than any president in American history. Child separation got reversed. He didn't repeal the Affordable Care Act. He didn't build the wall. They did not do mass deportation. It was actually quite effective. The legal resistance, the folks in the civil service who resisted him, the people in his own administration, he didn't pull off a coup, even though he tried to get one. And then people were like, well, because he got reelected in this other atmosphere, that means that the resistance to him the first time around didn't work. But I think that's just conflating two different eras and two different structural questions. But it meant that Democratic politicians went in being like, well, we're not going to do the same thing we did last time. And I think we're just in that they had the wrong posture. It was like being on your heels, on defense. You're going to fall over if you have to be on the balls of your feet and leaning forward. And I think you're starting to see them make that change.
Says a very good basketball player that I've hooped with.
Yeah, we played. Yeah.
Maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
Last audience question. People are giving up subscriptions to their daily newspapers in favor of journalists and news analysis from people like Heather Cox Richardson or the Contrarian or the Handbasket. How does the mainstream media plan to compete with new media? I mean, you have a podcast. You're on TikTok, as we've already discussed. What's your personal answer to that question?
I mean, I do think people should use their dollars to support journalism that's good journalism. And that can be a Substack, and that could be the New York Times, and that could be, wherever. I think that, I don't think we need, I can't speak to the media broadly. I feel extremely mission-focused right now. I feel like I have a job to do. It's important that I do the job well. I'm going to keep doing the job, and I can't control anything other than that. And this relates a little bit to how I feel about the ratings, and I think it's just kind of Serenity Prayer 101 cliche of what can I control and what can't I control. What I can control is doing work that I think is good and I'm proud of. And I can't really control anything else. So it just kind of rationally makes the most sense to put all my focus on what I can control.
I have to say this. I know for sure this is the first time I've been with a group maybe larger than my family since the fires. It's really special to be here with all you guys, and especially to be here with you. What Chris has done. with this donation you're going to make to the National Day Laborers Organizing Network. I don't know if you guys know them, but I would encourage you guys to look them up too. They are doing such extraordinary work. These are undocumented folks literally doing the recovery all throughout the city while at risk of deportation, while not being able to get federal benefits, all kinds of stuff like that. And man, it's really awesome what you're doing.
Well, I want to say just to you that Jacob did a great reporting on them. And it was his reporting, because we were actually texting back and forth. I was like, I want to do something where where I make a donation, for this event. Obviously, like, we've all been covering this very intensely. And also all of us were 1 degree removed from someone that had lost their house or.
Sure, people in this room, yeah.
Yeah, so, but I'm saying even on the East, even in New York, it's like, it's so close. Yeah. And I just thought that they're an amazing group and the work that's being done. And it is one of those things. I remember this happened in Katrina too. Like, after Katrina, I don't know if people remember the Chinese drywall, but there was just tons of immigrant folks who were working their butts off to rebuild that city. And it's really important that they have the support, both from a moral standpoint, but also, like, there is a lot of physical labor that's going to have to get done to rebuild this city. And they're going to be providing a huge amount of it.
Well, God bless you, man. Thank you for being here. Chris Hayes.
Thank you.
The Sirens Call. Tell your friends.